Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Jake sat quietly at the edge of their bed, observing a scene that had become familiar over the years. His wife, Barbara, getting ready for a night out. This particular evening, however, felt different from all the rest. Though he still found joy in watching her, a profound sadness seemed to cloud that joy, pressing heavily on his heart. How is it possible, he thought, that she looks even more stunning tonight than she has in all the years I've known her? Barbara was about to turn 50, and they had a special evening planned just for the two of them, a private celebration ahead of tomorrow's big birthday party with their children and grandchildren. As she sat at her vanity, Jake let his gaze linger on her, admiring the beauty that had remained untouched by the years. Her hair still framed her face perfectly. Her body was as graceful as ever, a testament to the effort she had put in to stay fit. And that smile, that teasing glint in her eye. He couldn't help but smile, thinking about how she always playfully flaunted herself. Pride swelled within him, pride in the woman he loved for 3 decades, but it was quickly overtaken by the weight of his sadness. Jake was a man who took pride in his logical, problem-solving nature. He was the one colleagues turned to when something at work needed careful analysis, knowing he'd deliver a well-thought-out solution, even if it took time. But here, in this moment, that same logic was of no comfort. He found himself sitting on the bed, feeling lost, his mind filled with questions. Is this really the last time I'll get to watch her like this? I love her more than anything. Why does it feel like I'm losing her? What went wrong? How did I not see it coming? His thoughts tumbled over each other, circling around in an endless loop like ripples across a still pond. He realized that tonight could mark a turning point, perhaps the most significant one in his life. A decision lay ahead, one that could mean a new beginning or the unraveling of everything he held dear. He had been preparing for this conversation for weeks, agonizing over how they had arrived at this fragile point in their relationship. The more he thought about it, the more he recognized that perhaps they weren't the perfect couple everyone believed them to be. He went over the clues in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. When did it start? Months ago, it seemed. She had begun pulling away, becoming more distant and preoccupied. He now realized that their intimacy had gradually faded until it had all but disappeared. Then there were her outbursts, sharp and unwarranted anger over trivial things. But what bothered him most were the lies. He recalled a specific moment, a dinner charge for 2 at a restaurant where he hadn't been with her. That night, it was clear something had shifted between them, and he wasn't the only person on her mind. Over the past couple of weeks, though, everything had changed again, almost as abruptly as before. Now Barbara seemed attentive, eager even. She was suddenly affectionate, wanting to be close to him, to rekindle the love they had once shared. It should have made him happy, but instead, it left him bewildered. Why now, he wondered. What changed? He couldn't make sense of the shifts in her behavior. Each transformation felt like a departure from the woman he had married and loved for so long. Where had she gone? The kind, loving woman he once knew? Would he ever find her again? This new version of her felt foreign, and he didn't like what he saw. Shaking himself from his thoughts, Jake knew it was time to speak. "Barbara," he began, his voice soft but steady. "I just want you to know how much I love you. Watching you tonight, you're as beautiful as ever. I've loved you all these years, and I always will." Barbara paused, her reflection meeting his in the mirror. A curious expression crossed her face. "Thank you, Jake," she replied gently. "I'm not sure what made you say that, but I want you to know I love you too." She studied him for a moment longer, sensing the weight of something unspoken in the air. What's been troubling him so much lately? She wondered, her concern mirroring his unspoken fears. No matter how much effort she put into fixing their relationship, it felt like the more she tried, the more distant and detached he became. With an internal sigh, she reminded herself, I just have to keep trying. I'm not giving up on this. I love him so much, and I need him to love me the way I love him." Quietly, Jake murmured, "I wonder if you love me the way I love you." Her ears perked up. "What did you just say, Jake? You've been mumbling a lot lately. I need you to speak clearly." Meeting her gaze, he repeated himself, "I wonder if you love me as much as I love you." In any other situation, the expression on her face might have been amusing. His words hit her like a punch, and her mouth fell open. "Why would you say that?" she asked, her voice laced with hurt. "How could you even think that, let alone say it out loud? Are you just trying to be clever, or do you realize how painful those words are?" Jake, keeping his composure, replied, "We need to have a serious talk." "We've got a little time before we go out," he continued. "I need to say some things and ask you some questions. I'm not asking for answers right now, but by the end of tonight, I will need them." Barbara nodded, feeling a sense of dread rise up. "Of course, ask me anything. I have nothing to hide from you. You're my husband, my partner." Jake almost couldn't help but smirk at her words. Tension rippled through his body, like a tightly pulled cord ready to snap. "Barbara, listen carefully. There are some things I need to say, and I don't want responses just yet. I want you to think about them tonight. Your honest answers are crucial for the future of our marriage." Oh God, this is it. He wants a divorce, she thought, panic settling in. But as he'd asked, she stayed quiet, suppressing the urge to speak. Jake, steady and deliberate, laid out his concerns, systematically walking her through everything that had been bothering him. "First off, you've practically shut me out of your life for months. Then, out of nowhere these last couple of weeks, you've been bending over backwards to please me, like you're trying to cater to my every need, even in bed. It's like I'm living with two different people. One minute, you're distant and unpredictable, and the next, you're trying to be my servant. For months, I felt like I was walking on eggshells, not knowing when your temper might explode. And then, there's the lies, over and over again, about where you've been and who you were with. The last straw was finding that receipt for dinner for two, and I know for a fact I wasn't the other person at that table. So here we are." Jake's eyes locked onto hers. "I think you've been cheating. I think the affair ended recently, and now you're trying to slip back into our life like nothing happened. So here's what I need to know. Do you want a divorce? Do you love him? How many times and with how many people have you cheated?" He paused, giving her a moment before delivering the final blow. "Do you still want to stay married? And if you do, will there be more affairs? What reason can you give me to convince me that staying married to you is worth it?" Barbara was silent, staring at him, completely frozen. Jake, noticing her composure, or what he thought was composure, was actually witnessing her utter shock and speechlessness. He stood up, his voice firm. "Finish packing. I'll be waiting downstairs. We're going to be late if you don't hurry." Somehow, she managed to gather herself and finish getting ready, meeting Jake downstairs. The evening stretched on, and despite the heavy conversation that loomed over them, Jake reminded her that he didn't want to discuss any of his accusations during dinner. To her surprise, she found she could almost enjoy the time spent together, though the extra wine helped. By the time they returned home, Barbara was drained. Exhausted from the emotional weight of the night and a little too tipsy from the alcohol, she knew she wasn't in the right state to continue the conversation. Complaining of a headache, she excused herself and quickly changed into her nightgown. Crawling into her side of the bed, she fell asleep almost immediately, escaping from the painful reality she would eventually have to face. Jake, seeing how exhausted she was, decided it was best to delay their discussion. Not wasting any time, he climbed into bed himself, deciding tomorrow would be a better day for answers. Once again, he'd had too much to drink the previous night and fell into a deep, undisturbed sleep. By the time morning came, Jake was the first to rise. After a quick shower, he headed to the kitchen to start preparing breakfast. The first thing he did was set the coffee to brew, as he knew Barbara would soon join him, just as she often did. She was never one to linger in bed for long. Jake was already seated at the table when she finally entered the kitchen. "Can I get you some coffee?" he asked. Maybe you'd like some toast or something light? I'll take some coffee, Jake, she replied. But I'll pass on the food. My stomach's not ready for it yet. After last night, with everything that happened and all the drinks, I think I'll just stick to coffee. Barbara, Jake said, his voice calm but firm. Last night I laid everything out. I told you exactly what I needed to say, and now it's your turn. This morning, you get the floor, so give it your best shot, and let's see where we stand. I've been thinking about what you said, Jake, she began, her voice soft but steady. I heard you when you told me how important honesty is. I've thought about it a lot. I need you to understand that you're the only man I've ever loved, and I haven't been with anyone else since the day we got married. I'll try to respond to everything in the order you brought it up. She took a deep breath before continuing. No, I've never wanted a divorce. There's no one else, no lover hiding in the background. So, no, I don't have anyone else to confess to you about. I've never cheated on you. I've always been faithful since the day we said our vows, and I don't want that to change. I want to stay married to you more than anything, and I will stay loyal to you for as long as we both live. That credit card charge? It was just a business dinner. Either you forgot about it or I forgot to mention it. Whichever it wasn't anything more than that. And the reason I want to keep you by my side is because I love you. I love only you with everything I have, my heart, my body, my soul. She hesitated for a moment, then continued, It's my fault too, for being distant. But you've also been distant. We both went through a rough patch in this marriage, and I don't think either of us fully realized it. But recently, I've started to remember why I love you so much. For the last couple of weeks, I've been trying to show you how much I care. I wanted to rekindle the love we almost lost. Jake looked at her, meeting her eyes with intensity. Barbara held his gaze, her expression calm, unwavering. Jake, you have to believe me. I love you and only you. Jake continued staring at her, his face unreadable at first. But then, slowly, his expression began to change. Sadness crept over him, deepening with each second, until it looked as though he might break down. Jake, what's wrong? Are you feeling okay? Barbara's concern grew with his silence. Do you need me to call someone? Maybe 911? Finally, Jake spoke, his voice low and monotone. Barbara, I love you. I've always loved you. But I was hoping we could finally be honest with each other. I guess you can't, or won't, be truthful with me. I gave you every opportunity to do so because I genuinely wanted to make this marriage work. His voice grew stronger, laced with anger. I did everything I could to save us, but I know you didn't. You didn't hold up your end. He reached into his lap, pulling out a large manila envelope, and slid it across the table to her. I still love you, Barbara, but love isn't enough anymore. I don't want to be your husband any longer. I filed for divorce. You need to find a lawyer and have them contact mine. His voice hardened further. I don't want to see you or speak to you anymore. I'm going to pack my things now and I'll be leaving soon. I suppose I should say I'm sorry, but I don't think you're sorry, so I don't feel the need to apologize. You've made your choices, and now you'll have to live with them. Jake stood up slowly and made his way upstairs to gather his clothes and toiletries. He had already booked a hotel room and, on his lawyer's advice, had taken care of all the financial arrangements to begin living separately from Barbara. Barbara sat frozen in place, stunned by what had just transpired. She didn't fully comprehend what was happening as Jake continued packing his things. He finished without saying another word, and when he finally left, she remained at the kitchen table, unmoving, for almost an hour. At last, she mustered the courage to drag the ominous envelope closer. With trembling hands, she opened it, revealing the documents that spelled out the end of her life with Jake. Why didn't he trust me? She thought, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. Why did he believe all those terrible things about me? She was certain they could fix things, but Jake had already shut the door on any chance of reconciliation. Barbara's gaze lingered on the papers, her eyes glazing over without absorbing the words. Something else caught her attention inside the envelope. It seemed to be a photograph. Her fingers hesitated before retrieving it. When she saw it, her heart stopped. The image showed her unmistakably on all fours in her own bed with another man, and that man was not Jake. A gasp escaped her throat before she could stop it. Suddenly, it all made sense. Jake knew. She had believed her deception about the affair with Richard was foolproof, that Jake would never catch on. After ending the affair, she had genuinely tried to fix what she had broken in her marriage. But looking at the photo, she realized with crushing clarity that the only way to truly save her relationship would have been to confront the truth from the beginning. Yet, given the betrayal she had committed, honesty and integrity had been far from her strengths. The hardest truth of all was that Jake was gone, and he wasn't coming back. She knew he was a man of his word, and divorce was the only option he would accept. Deep down, she had lost the one person she had ever really loved. The irony was sharp. All the passion, all the exhilarating moments of her affair paled in comparison to the time she had shared with Jake. The vows they had taken, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, now twisted painfully in her chest, piercing her with the realization of what she had thrown away. This agony couldn't match what Jake must have endured, but it was the deepest pain she had ever felt. She knew now, without a doubt, that she was a betrayer. She had not only betrayed her husband, but their children, their entire family. That label, cheater, would now cling to her for the rest of her life. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. One day, my world turned upside down because of an unexpected revelation from a close friend. Charles, a friend of mine for many years, called me at work. His voice trembled with tension as he described what he had seen. Barbara, my wife, was holding hands with another man. They were walking into a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. To prove it, he had taken several photos. At first, I couldn't believe it. There had to be a reasonable explanation for why she went to a motel with another man, especially during work hours when she was supposed to be at the office. I should clarify, my name is Thomas. Still shaken by Charles's call, I immediately asked him to send me the photos. When the images appeared on my phone, I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. There was no denying it. Barbara was in the photos. That evening, I tried to maintain my composure. I casually asked her how her day had been and whether she had gone out for lunch. To my surprise, she lied to my face. She calmly said she had eaten lunch at her desk. I raised an eyebrow and asked again, "Are you sure you didn't go out for lunch today?" Her reaction was immediate and defensive. "What are you trying to say, that I'm lying?" she snapped, without a trace of guilt. Although the photos and her lie didn't provide the full picture, it was more than enough to ignite my suspicions. Like many men in such situations, I decided to hire a private investigator. The detectives I approached were nothing like what I had imagined. Instead of meeting a gruff ex-cop in a smoky office, I found myself in a sleek, modern space run by two young, tech-savvy professionals. They were experts in finding information in the digital world that was inaccessible to regular people. Their services were expensive, but they assured me the results would be worth it. 10 days later, I returned to their office. They handed me a thick folder of undeniable evidence, photos, videos, and detailed reports. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Barbara was not seeing just one man, but two. One of them was Liam Byrne, a salesman from her work, with whom she had been having an affair for over 2 years. The other was Michael Miller, a mechanic she had started seeing a few months ago. The evidence was overwhelming, and I knew there was no avoiding the inevitable. My next step would be contacting a divorce lawyer. If this had been a one-time mistake, I might have found the strength to forgive her. But 2 years of infidelity? That was unbearable. The report even included transcripts of her conversations with Liam, showing that he wasn't the first man she had cheated on me with. Barbara felt perfectly comfortable living a double life. She enjoyed the stability and comfort I provided, but also found pleasure in her affairs with other men. While she had her own job, it was my business that gave us the comfortable lifestyle and paid for our children's college education. Meeting with the divorce lawyer was a sobering experience. I quickly realized that the legal system doesn't care about infidelity. Despite Barbara's actions, I would likely lose half of everything I had, and I might even have to sell my business to give her what she was entitled to. On top of that, I would probably have to pay monthly alimony, essentially financing her life while she continued her affairs. The only comfort was that our children were already grown and no longer lived with us. But the house? She would most likely get that too. I left the lawyer's office feeling more devastated and angry than ever before. The final blow came during a meeting with Margaret, my company's accountant. She came with great news. The business was thriving, and 3 new clients were about to raise its value to over $20 million. But as she enthusiastically explained the numbers, she stopped, noticing my indifference. "Thomas, I'm telling you that your hard work is finally paying off, and you look like you want to punch a wall," she said, confused. I took a deep breath and told her everything, about Barbara's infidelity, the grim outlook from the lawyer, and the possibility of losing everything, including the company. Margaret listened, expressing sympathy, and suggested postponing the meeting, understanding that I wasn't in the right state of mind to continue. She packed up her things and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The rest of the day passed in a fog, completely useless. Later in the afternoon, Margaret called again. "Thomas, can you stop by my office on your way home? I have an idea." At that moment, I was willing to do anything to delay going home and facing Barbara. Margaret led me into the office and closed the door with a sense of urgency. "First, I need to ask you a few questions," he said in a serious tone. "You've always told me that Barbara is hardly involved in your business, right?" I nodded, not quite sure where this was heading. "So she doesn't know that the company's value is about to skyrocket?" Margaret continued. "That's right," I replied. "I've never discussed business matters with her, and to be honest, we haven't been talking much at all lately." "Why do you need to know this?" I asked, feeling my curiosity growing. Margaret raised his hand to stop me. "Wait, I'll explain everything. But first, one last question. She doesn't suspect that you know about her affairs, does she?" "Exactly," I confirmed, shaking my head. "I haven't said a word to her, and I haven't confronted her about it." Margaret took a deep breath, his voice becoming firmer. "Here's the solution. You need to file for divorce, but don't rush into it. You remember what the lawyer said about how you'd be at a disadvantage if you divorce her, right?" "Yes," I answered. "He said I would lose a lot if everything went the usual way." "That's only if you go the traditional route with a straightforward divorce," Margaret explained. "But what if you could make her agree to your terms?" I frowned in confusion. "How do you suggest I do that? Are you implying I should blackmail her?" Margaret shook his head, dismissing the idea. "No, that won't work, especially when so much money is at stake. Blackmail won't be necessary. She'll agree to your terms herself, without even realizing what's happening. Have you ever heard of a tax divorce?" I looked puzzled. "No, what's that?" Leaning back in his chair, Margaret explained, "A few years ago, some couples would get divorced at the end of the year to lower their tax liabilities, especially if one spouse was earning significantly more. It became popular in December, and some couples saved enough money to afford lavish vacations before getting remarried. The government has since closed those loopholes, but I doubt Barbara knows anything about tax law." I thought about it. "I'm not sure, Margaret. She's mentioned several times that she doesn't really want a divorce. She just enjoys her little affairs while living off of me. She even hinted that she plans to quit her job so she can have more free time." Margaret smirked. "That's perfect. Her greed will play right into your hands. Tell her the business is growing, but with success comes higher taxes. Tell her you'll need to travel more, but she can quit her job and live the way she wants. She'll think it's a win-win situation. More freedom, more money." I raised an eyebrow. "And then what? Suggest a tax-free divorce as part of the plan, with the promise of a vacation to remarry afterward?" "Exactly," Margaret said with unwavering confidence. "We'll draft the paperwork on favorable terms. You'll keep control of the business, avoid paying alimony, and she'll be living in her fantasies. It's all perfectly legal." Is it really legal? I asked, still doubtful. Absolutely, Margaret assured me. I'll handle the paperwork. Your job is to keep everything a secret. If she gets suspicious, the plan will fall apart. You have to act like nothing has changed. The hardest part hit me at that moment. The real challenge would be controlling my emotions when I was already boiling with anger and resentment. It enraged me that she spent her Tuesdays and Thursdays with other men, lying to me about working late. The private investigators' reports were crystal clear. Tuesdays with a mechanic, Thursdays with a salesman. I managed to stay calm, suppressing my fury. A week later, Margaret had all the documents prepared. He gave me a detailed report outlining the financial benefits of this so-called tax plan, including transferring the house to Barbara's name. Luckily, the conversation was scheduled for a Wednesday, not one of her affair days. If she had just returned from seeing one of her lovers, I'm not sure I would have been able to keep my cool. That evening, when she walked in, I was already sitting at the kitchen table, 3 folders in front of me. "We need to talk," I said in a calm, confident voice. Her face immediately changed, revealing everything I needed to know. Barbara nervously glanced at the stack of folders on the table. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I picked up the top folder and opened it. "Yes, everything is under control." I continued, "Actually, it's great news, but I need to explain everything before you react. The business is doing really well, and we're ready to take a big step forward. You know I've always made sure we were financially stable, but a significant portion of the profits has always gone back into the company. Now, we've reached a point where it will start bringing in substantial dividends. The only complication is how we're going to handle the tax deductions." Barbara's interest peaked at the mention of taxes. "My accountant and I found a way to save about $100,000 in taxes," I said, watching her face light up. $100,000? That's amazing. But we're not doing anything illegal, right? She asked, worried. No, I reassured her. It's all perfectly legal. Many people do it. But before you get too excited, let me explain what it involves. Barbara's patience was wearing thin. "All right, Thomas, stop dragging it out. What are you talking about?" she demanded. I opened another folder and looked at her. "It's called a tax divorce," I said, carefully observing her reaction. She gasped audibly. "Wait, let me explain," I quickly added. "It's a strategy some people use to avoid the spousal tax penalty. In our case, the new income would result in a huge penalty. Margaret, my accountant, told me that some of her clients file for divorce in December to avoid this, and then they use the saved money for a vacation and remarry in January. The only catch is that under the new rules, you have to stay divorced for at least 6 months, or it's considered fraud." Barbara looked stunned as she processed what she had just heard. "It would only be a divorce on paper," I said, trying to calm her. "Margaret mentioned that if we really want to maximize the benefit, we should stay divorced for a full year to get an even larger tax break in the second year. Of course, I'd have to work a bit more and travel occasionally, but the benefit for the business and for both of us would be significant. You might even be able to quit your job." I could see the thoughts spinning in Barbara's mind as she considered the potential benefits. "What else would we need to do?" she asked, her curiosity beginning to outweigh her doubts. "Well, we would need to officially file for divorce," I explained, pulling out another folder. "On paper, we'd split our assets. I would transfer the house into your name and divide the bank accounts. I'd also put the utilities in your name, but don't worry, I'll pay all the bills. In our day-to-day life, not much would change, but we'd be able to save a lot more money." She started to speak, but I quickly raised my hand to stop her. "I know how important our marriage is to you. We don't have to do this if you're uncomfortable. We can always just pay the extra taxes." Barbara was on the verge of making a decision. After a while, she sighed. "I don't like the idea of a divorce, even if it's just on paper. But if it saves us that much money, maybe it's worth it." I nodded, hiding my excitement. "I don't want to rush you, but Margaret said we need to act quickly. We need to sign the papers and start the process so she can get everything set up. Take your time to read it all before signing. I'm leaving for a business trip this Friday and will be gone for the weekend." I knew this was the final push Barbara needed. She looked at the papers and nodded. "You're right. This really does seem like the best option. I'll go through everything and sign it before you leave so Margaret can get started. As I expected, Barbara signed the documents before I left for my trip. She was exactly where I needed her to be. This was no typical business trip, though I used the time to gather evidence and find out if she had truly moved on to her new boyfriends. I discreetly installed cameras throughout the house to monitor her actions in my absence. As expected, and in line with her usual behavior, she was in my bed with one of them less than an hour after I left. The divorce unfolded exactly as I had predicted. The only real change in our day-to-day life was that we completely stopped being intimate. Barbara brought it up a few times, but I always blamed it on work stress and the financial strain of our new expenses. She didn't push further, likely because she was already getting what she wanted from her two lovers. I continued to watch her activities in our bedroom. It brought me no pleasure. I had long since become accustomed to her being with other men. What intrigued me most was whether she had caught on to my plan. A week after filing for divorce, the judge finalized the decision. However, there were stipulations on when changes could be made and under what circumstances. Margaret, my lawyer, reminded me that we needed to wait until the cooling-off period passed before anything became final. As that time drew closer, I realized I wanted to be rid of her completely. I met with Margaret to discuss our next move. Yes, I wanted to leave, but more than anything, I wanted her to suffer. I wanted to expose her affairs in the most humiliating way possible. "Thomas," Margaret said, "if you admit you knew about her cheating before the divorce, she could claim it was all a setup to protect your assets from her." "But she's the one who cheated," I countered. "She should be punished." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Are you willing to take that risk? The simplest thing to do is catch her with one of these guys in bed and leave. Take a few photos so she can't deny it." "So she just gets away with it?" I jumped out of my chair. Margaret shook her head. "I didn't say she gets away with it. She's already erased you from her life. You don't owe her alimony, and the best part, you're free from her." That wasn't enough for me. There has to be a way to ruin her without jeopardizing the divorce. Margaret stopped me by raising her hand. "Wait, you've got plenty of recordings of her with these men after the divorce, right?" I nodded. "Use that. Claim you weren't planning on getting remarried. Cut off her access to the house's communication systems and finances. Then tell her lovers and their families everything. Watch how it all falls apart." "I can say I only found out about the affairs after the divorce," I said, warming up to the idea. "That way I can destroy her while staying within the law." "Exactly," Margaret confirmed. "Now is the perfect time. With your new contracts, you're about to become very wealthy. Let's find you a new place to live and she can deal with the fallout. In a month, you can deliver the final blow." Margaret paused for a moment, considering. "You'll also need to think about how to handle the kids. That won't be easy. But I think when they find out what she's done, they'll side with you. She always lectured them about honesty and fidelity." I smirked at the thought. Barbara had put on quite the show when our daughter went to a concert with another guy while in a relationship. She had said, "Dishonesty will destroy any relationship." Margaret smiled at the hypocrisy. "Yes, it's pretty incredible." "I'm sure my daughter will hate her once she knows the truth," I said. Margaret met my eyes. "Thomas, remember, you don't need to do anything drastic to cut Barbara off. The divorce is done. You're no longer married to her, and you don't have to pay for a house that doesn't belong to you. Just let it go." With that, I left my meeting with Margaret, ready to move on and finish this chapter of my life. I had already found a new apartment and was more than prepared for the changes. In 7 days, I would be fully ready to leave my old life and my former home behind. It was extremely important for me to see both of my children before everything fell apart. They were busy with summer courses on their campuses. My son, Oscar, immediately took my side. He was furious about what his mother had done but promised not to confront her until I had left the house. My daughter, Samantha, however, was not so easily convinced. Samantha found it hard to believe that her mother was capable of such betrayal. She couldn't reconcile her mother's actions with the lessons she had been taught about trust and loyalty. It pained me to do it, but I was ready. I showed Samantha irrefutable evidence of her mother's affair. The disbelief in her eyes quickly turned to anger when she saw the proof. Samantha wanted to confront her mother right away, but I had to convince her to wait until I had moved out. When I returned to town, everything fell into place perfectly. The second contract I had been waiting for was signed, and I signed the lease for a new apartment. The furniture was scheduled to arrive in 3 days. In 2 days, I would begin executing my plan. The first step was to move out. While Barbara was at work, I quietly left the house. With a rented truck and a few friends, I took only the essentials: tools, clothes, and personal items, no furniture. I also removed the hidden cameras I had installed throughout the house. Barbara had become so accustomed to my absence that she didn't even notice I'd been gone for several days. But the next phase of my plan would definitely get her attention. I anonymously sent emails to the wives of her 2 lovers, attaching videos that exposed their infidelity. I felt a slight pang of guilt, knowing what kind of storm was about to hit those families. But I reminded myself that I didn't start this. I was simply bringing everything to a just conclusion. About 20 minutes after I sent the emails, Barbara left me a voicemail asking me to call her back. She still thought I was out of town. By the evening, her calls became more urgent. Eventually, she realized my things were gone. I continued to ignore her increasingly frantic calls and messages. Both of my children told me she had called them, sounding desperate, asking if they had spoken to me. They covered for me, claiming they hadn't heard from me in a while. They tried to find out from her why she was so desperate to reach me, but she refused to explain what was causing her sudden anxiety. She didn't even explain what had triggered her unexpected distress. I let her stew in confusion for 3 more days without saying a word. By Thursday, I knew she'd be home alone, the perfect moment to talk to her after I'd struck her lovers. "Thomas, why are you knocking on your own house's door? Where have you been?" she asked in surprise as I stood at the door. "This is no longer my house, Barbara. After the divorce, it's entirely yours. May I come in?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, come in. But what are you talking about? We need to decide when we're getting remarried. I'm tired of this whole fake divorce story," she said, trying to regain control of the situation. "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss. The divorce isn't fake. It's as real as it gets, and you took full advantage of it," I said, watching as worry flashed in her eyes, though she tried to maintain an air of confidence. "What do you mean? I told you I was done with the games and ready to renew our vows," she retorted sharply. I couldn't hold back my laughter. "Oh, come on, stop pretending," I said. She stared at me. "Where are your things?" she asked irritably. "You noticed? I moved out," I replied casually. "I couldn't sleep in the same bed where you had your affairs." She sighed heavily. "Let's just end this game, as you said." I fully realized that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you meet with 2 different men, and this doesn't change even when I'm not around. Legally, we're not married, so I suppose technically you're not cheating. But your actions have led me to a decision. I will not be renewing our vows. You yourself destroyed 25 years of marriage. It's better for both of us to stay divorced, and that's why I left. Barbara's face quickly shifted from shock to rage. "What are you saying? No, that's not how it's going to be. We're still married, and the divorce was just a formality for taxes." She threatened legal action, insisting, "We're married, damn it! You can't just walk away." I stood my ground. "Actually, I can. It's completely legal. You signed the papers in front of the judge." She tried to argue. "One could claim you were deceived, but that's fraud, and I won't support you if you go down that path. It's a serious crime." Her anger intensified. "This is absurd. I know what you're up to. You found out about Liam and orchestrated this fake divorce to cut me out of your business." I shook my head in confusion. "Wait, what? Are you seriously telling me you were having an affair with Liam while we were still married?" She didn't deny it. Instead, she countered, "Who are you to talk? You told their wives behind my back, didn't you? You destroyed 2 families with your sneaky letters. Now both men have been kicked out of their homes and are caught up in nasty divorces thanks to you." I was stunned. "2 men? You've been with 2 this whole time?" Barbara tried to avoid answering. "What difference does it make? The divorce is legal, and you can throw as much money at it as you want, but it won't change anything. Maybe you should focus on explaining this to our children. I'm sure they won't be proud of their mother." Her rage grew. "You told them, didn't you? How could you involve our kids in this?" I remained calm. "Honestly, I should have told them a long time ago why we weren't renewing our vows." She wasn't giving up. "Stop playing games. We're still married, and that's how it's going to stay. Liam and Michael? They're in the past. They mean nothing. I love you. Yes, I made mistakes, but I want to fix them and be the wife you deserve." I sighed, feeling the weight of her words. "I'm glad you finally realize the damage you've done, but I think this lesson is one you'll need for your next husband, not me." Before leaving, I added, "By the way, I haven't told your parents yet. I'll leave that to you, unless you want me to do it myself." Her face turned pale. "My mom, it'll kill her." I nodded. She was already in shock when she found out, and I had to show her some proof, though I spared her the worst details to convince her. Barbara's desperation was obvious as she pleaded, "Please give me one more chance. I'll make it right. I'll be better." But my decision was final. As I walked away, her pleas turned into curses, with tears streaming down her face. She didn't stop there. She fought to annul the divorce, filing multiple lawsuits demanding the terms be changed. I couldn't help but find it absurd as she stood in court, openly admitting to her affairs with two men even before we separated. She claimed I manipulated the divorce for tax purposes to cut her out of my business. All the while, our children and her parents sat in the courtroom watching her lose control. As expected, the judge ruled against her, giving her a stern reprimand for her lack of accountability. After the hearing, my parents approached her, outraged by her betrayal. And then, in a moment no one expected, her mother delivered the final blow, a punch right to Barbara's face. Barbara turned to our children, Samantha and Oscar, for support, but they turned away from her, unable to reconcile with what she had become. In the end, neither of them wanted anything more to do with her. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.